you go, people know that Illinois is the worst off in the entire nation in terms of state finances. People are leaving this state in droves, which is a very, very serious trend. So yes, they want to change. What the Democrats cite is they'll say, well, then why do we have supermajorities in the legislature? Well, that is a product of the gerrymandered map that the Democrats put in place. This state is not quite as democratic as they would like to believe.
And we're back. Thank you for staying with us. Now we're into the workforce segment of tonight's roundtable. Joining us this evening is Ms. Denise Gaines. She's with the Service Employees International Union. Yes. And also Mr. Anders Lindahl, who's with the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Interesting comment once again. We've talked about that in the previous segment about the number of people who've left the state. Certainly we can chat about that, but I want to get to the next question. I want to get your response to something that the Chicago Sun-Times addressed this past year. According to the Chicago Sun-Times in 2010, nearly 9,000 state workers, about 1 in 10, made more than $100,000 annually. Nearly 700 earned about $180,000 or more, which is more than what the previous governor was earning on an annual basis, aside from the fact that the current governor is not taking a salary more than $1. I want to point out that half of those, just less than half of those high income earners were union. More than half, 53%, were non-union. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, the median household income for a family of four in Illinois is about $83,000. So are public complaints that state workers are overpaid justified, or is there more to consider?
I would say there's absolutely more to consider. Our members are low-wage workers. Some are maybe working class at best. They do work that a lot of people do not want to do. They take care of seniors, they take care of people with disabilities, and they take care of children. Our members are not, they are not, bankrolling off of the state, but they do important work. And believe me, our members deserve to get paid a fair wage. And I believe we fought so hard to get to where we are, and there's still a lot of levels that our members need to get to. So in no way are our members overpaid. And believe me, they are doing the work that many find valuable and needed in this state.
So for those homes that don't have a union member, how do you change that image for those people who tend to think, and I think it's probably a small percentage, but there are a vocal minority out there who says, well, union folks are just way overpaid. They're getting paid too much money here in the state. How do you change that image?
I mean, I really point to our workforce. I think our workforce is, many of our members, the people of Illinois see every day. There are people that come into their homes and do home care work, what they call personal assistants. And there are people that go and do child care work, where so people can go to work and go to school and still know that their children are in safe environments. So that work is truly loved by everyone in the state and is valued by everyone in the state. And believe me, there are multiple corporations who value the work that our members do because they benefit from the work that the CCAP program that many of their workers use while they're getting underpaid while working at some place like McDonald's or Walmart or places like that. So believe me, the people who don't have union workers in their home, they still benefit from the work that union workers do.
Mr. Lindahl, as I look through comments from our viewers here in the last several days, many of those that were critical of the governor often referred to him as an anti-union guy, or he was engaging in anti-union policies. And it brings up something that happened nearby a couple years ago, and I want you to address this if you could. In 2011, Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker had ushered in changes regarding state contributions to employee benefits and payments for state workers in the state. And this led to a successful recall petition effort in terms of getting it on the ballot to recall the governor, but he ultimately won his recall election. Exit polling data from June 2012 showed that, from Edison Research, as reported by the New York Times, showed that of those people who identified themselves as either being a union member or had a union member in the household, that Walker got 38% of those votes. Additionally, 51% of the people, according to exit data, who voted for Walker actually had favorable opinions of unions. It seems counterintuitive. Why is there kind of that disconnect that for people who may have thought or believed or accused him of having an anti-union policy, and had union members or union members themselves in their household voted for him. How do we reconcile that?
Well, I think first let's be clear about exactly what Governor Walker did. First, he stripped the rights of public service workers like teachers, caregivers, police, and exempted police, but he stripped the rights of teachers and other public service workers to have a voice on the job and to bargain collectively. He said that he wasn't going to touch private sector workers and he wasn't going to touch emergency responders. Then the recall election happened, and then after he was safely recalled, he passed so-called right-to-work legislation, which stripped the rights of all workers. So he wasn't truthful about what his intentions were, and he misled people. I think that I really disagree with the fundamental premise that you put your finger on of people, wanting to tear down folks who have a middle-class wage or affordable health care. There's a basic bargain in this country, in America, that has started to slip away, that if you work hard, that you should be able to provide for your family, have health care you can afford, take care of your kids, send them to college. And we've seen that slipping away over the past 30 years. What we've seen increasingly is that the middle class is standing still or falling back, and the path into that middle class is becoming ever narrower. It's no coincidence that union density has eroded over the same period of time. And that hasn't happened accidentally. It's happened as the result of a coordinated political and corporate assault on the rights of workers to have a voice on the job, to come together with their coworkers and to bargain for a better life. And we can't allow that to happen to public service workers as it's happened to private sector workers in this country. And we can't allow it to happen to any workers in Illinois as it's happened in Wisconsin. And I think it's been very encouraging that we have seen really all middle class workers, whether they're organized or not, whether they're public or private sector, have come together to say to Governor Rauner, this extreme anti-worker agenda does not play in Illinois.
Mm-hmm. And this speaks to maybe the larger issue, because when times are good, there's often little criticism of one group to another. Is the overriding issue that the state is in such challenging financial situation that we're looking for perhaps scapegoats? We're looking for someone to blame? And it goes back to the image question we discussed earlier.
I think that's what the folks on the top, the big corporations and rich individuals who have been getting really a pretty easy ride here in Illinois for a long time. That's what they want working and middle class people to do, to point fingers at one another. Here in Illinois, we have had the lowest in the nation flat income tax for more than 4 decades. We have a very narrow sales tax that only taxes the goods that working people buy, but not the luxury services that wealthy people use. So as more and more income is going to the top, they are not being adequately taxed for income purposes. And as wealthy people are consuming luxury services, they're also not paying a tax on that. So wealthy folks and big corporations have not been paying their fair share in the state, and that is really the root cause of our inability to invest in education, healthcare, public safety, and human services, care for folks who are the most vulnerable.
And this may tee up the next question for you in terms of your response. Ms. Gaines, we're nearly 40 days into the 2015 fiscal year, and this state is facing a potential $6 billion budget deficit. What are some of the sensible measures that should be taken so that the state can close that deficit, have a balanced budget, without having serious disruption to those people who are most in need?
I think Anders sort of hit it straight on the head. What we need is a real serious discussion about taxing in this state, and particularly about making sure that we have a fair and progressive taxation. I think we suffer from, we keep putting this off, and then we do piecemeal actions that we found ourselves doing with passing a temporary tax increase. There was no need to do that temporary tax increase if we had just hit this problem head on and went forth and looked at a progressive taxation and made sure that we took a look at the corporate tax loopholes where we're really funding corporations that truly are not qualified for these tax breaks or are abusing the tax breaks. So we really need to take a closer look at how we're taxing people in this state and making sure we're not putting the taxes unfairly on the lower class and the working class members of this state. So we got to make sure that we're looking at taxing and making sure that's fair.
And Mark,
And briefly, because I'm almost out of time, but please.
Sure. The budget shortfall is a senseless crisis. It happened as a result of rolling back tax policy from 2014. Most of those breaks went to big corporations and to wealthy individuals. Our governor personally got a $750,000 a year tax break. He doesn't need it. What we need to do is invest in the public services that people rely on. And the real concern is, like you say, disruption. That is a threatening word right now in Illinois, and a very real one, because we don't have a budget and we don't have a collective bargaining agreement in place for the state employees who provide those services. So that's what we really need to focus on, and the governor should drop his extreme political agenda at his preconditions that would hurt the middle class, and instead he should work with legislators toward a fairly funded budget and settle a collective bargaining agreement with public service workers at the table.
And I'm going to have to leave it there because we've run out of time for this segment. I'd like to thank my guests for the workforce segment. And now I want to check in with what our viewers at home think. So, Stacey, what do you have for us?
Boy, this sparked a heated debate on Facebook. Pension Talk did. If you go to our Facebook page and you scroll down, you can see there is a lot of comments, and you can join that conversation. Now, another topic that seems to get some heated debate, the turnaround agenda by Governor Rauner. We asked, should the General Assembly pass Governor Rauner's turnaround agenda? Let's take a look at what you had to say on Facebook. Steve writes, no, I do not feel the General Assembly should pass Governor Rauner's turnaround agenda. It was the same agenda the Koch brothers gave Scott Walker in Wisconsin to maximize their profits and stave off the middle-class workers. Wisconsin is failing. And Eric writes, yes, pass it. This state has been run into debt by Madigan and his cronies. The governor is fixing the problem if the career crooks would let him. Now, we want you to join the conversation on our social media pages. All you have to do, go to Facebook, look for WICS ABC20, or you can tweet us with the hashtag Your Voice, Your Future. Don't go away. Illinois State of Affairs will be right back.
Republicans are a little intimidated by their guy because they're looking to him to fund all their campaigns against us. They're looking to him to, and they're a little worried that he might fund campaigns against them. So as a result, their kind of hands are tied, and that's why we have this impasse. So,
Thank you for staying with us. We're now heading into our insider segment of tonight's roundtable, and joining me this evening to my immediate left is Mr. Rich Miller with Capital Facts, and then Jamie Dunn with Illinois Issues. And the comment we heard just a moment ago, I want to follow up on that. The executive branch and the legislative branch have their roles and their functions. Is it possible, based on what I've seen with our viewer comments over the last several days in terms of the sharp criticism of the governor, the Senate president, and the House Speaker, is it possible we have the wrong people negotiating some kind of settlement? What do you think, Mr.
Well, there's no way to create a world where these people don't exist. They've all been elected, duly elected, not only by their constituents, in the case of Madigan and Cullerton, by their chambers. So we have to deal with that. And, you know, we just got to make the best of it. And right now, I think, we have a situation where the governor wants the General Assembly to pass legislation before he'll talk about the budget. And the General Assembly wants the governor to do a budget. So they've kind of switched roles. Okay, the governor wants to be a legislator, and the legislators want to be the governor. And they need to get back to their roles, their constitutional roles. And maybe, then maybe, we can get past this.
Thoughts, Ms. Dunn?
I mean, absolutely, they are elected by not only the voters, but their fellow lawmakers. So, as Rich said, we've got what we've got. I think what we are seeing here is that they represent very different worldviews, very different ideologies coming in, and that's difficult. It's going to lead in clashing, and it's going to lead to compromise being difficult to find. That doesn't mean that they're the wrong folks for the job. It just means that they believe very different things.
When it comes to institutions in America, there probably isn't any institution that has a lower public approval rating than the U.S. Congress.
Oh, yes.
And yet every...
Oh, yes. The Illinois General Assembly, I'm sure, has a lower approval rating.
But every single year, every 2 years, members of Congress have such a high re-election rate for incumbents. And again, looking at what our viewers had to say over the last several days in terms of their comments about essentially throw all the bums out, and yet if you take a look at what happened in the 2014 election, there were 71 Democrats and 47 Republicans in the House before the election, and there were 71 Democrats and 47 Republicans in the House after the 2014 election. The numbers were almost identical in the Senate. There was actually a shift of one seat from Democrat to Republican. So when the public complains about the Illinois legislature, but they send the same people back to Springfield every year, what does it tell us?
Well, part of the problem, though, is that the system is rigged. Politicians choose their voters in Illinois because the majority party draws the map, the district map. And so they can say, I want that town, I want that block, I want that house in my district because there's 10 voters in that house and they all love me. And we have to get away from that. The real split isn't, Rauner won, I think, 15 Democratic held Senate districts last year. Not all those 15 senators were up for re-election because we have staggered terms. But there needs to be a lot more competition in our system. And it's being blocked by the majority party right now. And before that, it was blocked by the other party when it was a majority. I don't see that changing anytime soon either, and that's too bad.
So what Mr. Miller is suggesting is that we're going to see more of the same old for some period of time unless there is such a catastrophic series of events in the state that they're forced to perhaps differ from party policies. Perhaps few people break some promises they made. Any thoughts?
I do believe that that is probably the case, that we will have to see some, unfortunately, potentially sad situation come out of this budget impasse before we see things break loose. It definitely seems to be a possibility that things will have to bubble up through the legislative districts, personal tragedies and things that have happened when folks don't have the social services and things that they rely on, and see those lawmakers put pressure on the leadership when they're having their constituents deal with difficult situations.
But then again, we've had a governor impeached and removed from office in this state, and it changed very little. We had the governor before him ended up in prison. It changed very little. So when you say a cataclysmic event, removing a governor from office is pretty darn cataclysmic, right?
On that case, 4 out of the last 9 governors here in the state of Illinois went to prison. Is there a culture of corruption in the governor's office?
Well, for those governors there were, that's for sure. Some governors just didn't realize that times had changed. There were things that governors did 40 years ago that you just cannot do now, right? I think there has been, because Illinois has been a fairly prosperous state over the years until relatively recently, there was a tolerance for it, okay? As long as the trains ran on time, as long as the garbage was picked up, okay? We are looking now at a situation where that may change, as Jamie was saying. There is, the courts, for the most part, have, and the governor's signature on a budget, and they've got another on an education budget. About 80% of general revenue fund, if everything goes as planned here, is being spent through court order mainly, and one bill. But remaining is $7 billion and $2 billion in available revenues. You see what I'm saying? So you got $5 billion you have to cut somewhere. Universities are not getting any money. Do you cut them? Do you cut $3 billion in social service grants and put literally, the mentally ill and the developmentally disabled into the street? What do you do? And so that's where we're at. But we can't even get to that until we get to this turnaround agenda.
Mr. Miller mentioned that times have changed, and at the risk of putting my job on the line, let's turn the camera back on us. What about major media outlets? Have we failed in our job of holding government officials accountable? Are we asleep at the switch and not tracking them as well as we should be?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, watching the folks that cover the State House, it's a dedicated bunch of folks that are working long hours to make sure that that information is getting out there. I think it's difficult for people to sometimes see how it connects with their lives. And I mean, let's face it, it's complicated. It can be boring at times. So it is key for us to show people how it matters to them, and Rich just listed a lot of the ways that it matters to them. It's schools, it's the people who care for your parents, your grandparents, it's making sure that we have infrastructure and parks, and it touches people's lives every day. And sometimes I do think we fall down on making clear to people why it should matter to them and how it plays a role in their life.
And if you look at Rod Blagojevich's re-election, there were a ton of negative stories written about Governor Blagojevich. And he won by 10 percentage points over a much better person who would have been a much better governor. God rest her soul.
Yeah, the stories are out there. We just have to find a way to get people to read them and get people to care.
So let's talk about the governor's turnaround agenda. It's come up a couple times already this evening. Would it have been better received if it was introduced just much earlier in the legislative session and not towards the end of the session? And I'm almost out of time on this.
I'm not sure that it would have been better received. There might have been more time to hammer out a compromise, to put it through a more traditional process, to work through some of the differences. But the initial reception probably would have been similar.
Mr. Miller?
Until she's absolutely right. He has to drop anti-union things from his agenda, or the Democratic supermajorities are just not going to accept it.
So baby steps from here on out, perhaps?
The word compromise comes into play here, and neither side is willing to do that at this moment. And that's very unfortunate, and that's why we're here, and we don't get a budget until that gets resolved.
Baby steps is how the hard things get done.
And we've come to the end of our segment. We've run out of time. We hope you found some of the answers you were seeking from tonight's discussion. I'd like to thank all of our panelists who joined us this evening. Make certain you join our Facebook page at facebook.com/WICSABC20. Tell us what you thought of tonight's town hall. Watch tonight's news for a reaction to tonight's roundtable and all the day's breaking news. On behalf of our panel members and the staff and crew of News Channel 20, thank you at home for joining us. Finally, we salute our military, law enforcement, firefighters, EMTs, and other emergency personnel for their service to our communities and our nation. I'm Mark Hyman. Good night.
Thank you for watching our Town Hall Roundtable, Illinois State of Affairs, brought to you by Capital Blueprint and Stall's Furniture.